So somebody asked me recently what my kids thought about my abortion. And I thought that was a good question. I've read on a lot of like pro-life sites that your other children will resent you having an abortion if you have an abortion in like cases like mine. Um, I don't think that would be the case. Um, I can see how maybe if I didn't explain the situation to them very fully, they might, come away with the whole, well, would mom have aborted me if, if I hadn't been perfect? But um that this wasn't one of those, oh, you just weren't perfect kinds of situations. Actually, the funny thing that comes to mind, one of my children had a hole in his heart at the 20-week ultrasound. And we did the ultrasound, everything looked okay. The tech was pretty cheerful and chatty, so we weren't particularly worried. I came in for my next doctor's appointment. The doctor looked very serious. And so I was like instantly alert, like, okay, what's going on? He's like, okay, I don't want you to get too upset, but there's some things you need to know. Don't panic. It's not that bad. The baby has a hole in his heart. And I'm just listening. He's like, there is a surgery that we can do to fix it when the baby is born, and there's a possibility that it will just close up on its own as he develops inside the womb. And so I was like, oh, okay. They've got a fix for it. It's not that big a deal, It's heart surgery. Heart surgery is never fun, but, as he explained it, it was pretty standard as heart surgery goes, and so I wasn't particularly worried. And actually, at one point, he was like, you don't look particularly worried. I was like, would worrying help? He's like, well, no. And it ended up closing in on its own. Like the hole in the heart ended up closing up all on its own. I had to go and get some extra ultrasounds, which was kind of expensive, but we wanted to know what was going on with the baby. And that's one of the wonderful things about the 20-week ultrasound. You want to know these things so that, if he needed heart surgery when he was born, we would know that right away. But as it happened, he didn't need heart surgery. He was fine. Everything came out okay. He was born a healthy little baby. I think a lot of people, I know that sometimes people do abort for conditions that are not fatal, like little health quirks, not little, but health quirks. You can fix a cleft palate. I've seen cleft palate surgeries where they've reconstructed the face and it looks fine. You can't really tell. In fact, I don't think that you would know to even look for it unless you yourself had experience with it, and then you would know what it was, but you can't tell. There are issues that people, I think, sometimes get abortions for that, it's okay. You can live with this. I remember actually discussing abortion with my husband when we were first thinking about having kids. And we were talking about like a baby born with no arms and no legs, and it's like, well, he's still got a brain. He can still live. He's gonna be okay. And we were both on the same page with that. We actually did look at trisomy 18 at that time, and it was like, yeah, no, this is the thing. This is the one thing that we'd totally abort for. Not the one thing. I'm sure there were other conditions that we weren't aware of, but that was the one thing that was a more common condition that we both looked at, and it was like, no, this is something, it's never going to happen to us because it's so rare, but if it ever did, this is something we would abort for. And that's because it's extremely fatal. It's not one of those things where your baby gets to go on and live a normal life, or that you can fix it, or even that the baby will be disabled but still get to live. It's not like that. Now, I always have to say, medical technology is changing. There's always hope for a future with trisomy 18 not being this way anymore. And because medical technology is changing very rapidly, a lot of these videos may become obsolete, which would be lovely, There was a time when Down syndrome, I think it was in the 70s, Down syndrome, the average life expectancy was 12 years of age. It was not a good thing. Now the average life expectancy of someone with Down syndrome is somewhere in the 60s, I believe, like 60 years old, something like that. So you know, technology changes and lifespans change and prognoses change. And so I hope for a better future, but we're not at that future yet. And I've wandered way off the beaten path. Basically, all that being said, I would not blame my children if they were very bitter or resentful that I had the abortion. But just given the severity of the situation, it's not like it was a little teeny hole in his heart. It's not like it was some little superficial flaw. It's not like we had the abortion because he was flawed. We had the abortion because he was going to die. And we wanted his death to be as gentle and as painless as possible. I personally believe very strongly that I did not wish to myself bring a baby into this world just so that he could suffer the experience of dying. I know different parents have different ideas about how to handle a terminally ill pregnancy. I really, really sincerely believe, and I say it a lot, but I'm going to say it again, I sincerely believe that the parents should do what they believe is best for their baby. I think that's very, very important. So if you believe in carrying to term and keeping the baby comfortable and making sure the baby has, you know, as much comfort and nurturance as they die as possible, or even carry to term and fight for life as much as possible, you know, those decisions, there is no wrong choice. You have to do what you believe is best, and you have to weigh the situation and, you know, the medical elements of the situation, which tend to be highly personalized. You have to have the freedom to do that as a parent and as the person who is supposed to love and protect and do the best for your children that you can. And that was where my husband and I made our decision. And so, you know, if our kids ever ask about it, and we do intend to tell them when they get older. Right now, like at the time that I had my abortion, which was a few months back now, but at the time I had my abortion, the oldest of my 3 children was 3 years old. None of them, I don't know if anybody even knew I was pregnant, like any of the kids even knew I was pregnant. I don't know if they understand pregnancy to that degree. We weren't telling them that there was going to be a baby until we were further along, which ended up being a good thing because there wasn't ultimately a baby. But when they're older, I do plan to tell them and kind of explain that to them, the whole situation and the fact that we both, their father and I, we did what we thought was best for the baby's well-being. And I think that's very important because I don't ever want my kids to think that I got the abortion because of them for any reason. Do I personally feel like I could have taken care of a baby with trisomy 18 and my 3 other children, all under the age of 3, particularly well, all together, all at the same time? No, I don't think I was particularly well equipped to take care of all 4 of them, especially with all the health complications and special needs of a trisomy 18 baby. But that wasn't what made my decision, and I was very careful in looking at the decision that we were making, my husband and I was very careful not to let that factor in because I don't want my kids ever to feel any blame or guilt for what I have done. If when they're older and I explain this to them, they just don't get it and it just doesn't make sense and they feel like it was a horrible decision on my part and my husband's part, their dad, that's okay. They can blame me as much as they want, but I don't ever want them to blame themselves because that's not fair to them. But I don't think that I'm going to, when I explain it to them, I'm going to give them a lot of information. When they're finally old enough to hear about this, I'm going to give them a lot of information and I'm going to explain it as fully as I can. And I think that's important. Obviously now they're way too young to hear about this. They don't even know what death is yet. Like, they're at that age where death is like this kind of foreign concept. We have a flock of chickens outside. Sometimes we eat the chickens. That's kind of how they're coming to understand that death happens. There were 3 chickens. Now there are 2 chickens. We're going to get some more chickens because Easter is coming. But it's not the same as losing a sibling. And they're going to find out about that when they're older. I do think it is very important to talk about failed pregnancies, which I guess is the reason I started making this video in the first place. I've rambled for like 10 minutes, but I think it's very important to talk about failed pregnancies. My mom had a miscarriage before I was born, and she told me about that when I was a little bit older. And she told me that it was really hard, but that these things happen. She told me that she had heard that like 1 in 3 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage or something like that. From my own research, if you're healthy and under the age of 35, it's 1 in 10. And if you're over the age of 35, if you're over the age of 45, because I double checked that, like I listed the statistic, I listed the statistic originally and said it was 20%. So 1 out of every 5 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. I double checked that. It turns out it's only 1 in 10 pregnancies if you're healthy and under the age of 35, which is happening less and less these days. But those are the ones that are even recognized, like pregnancies where implantation hasn't occurred. We don't even have a clear idea of how many of those fail. But my mom had one that failed. She told me about it. She told me that, you know, after some time had passed and she felt ready to try again, she tried again. That's how my brother and I came into the world. My first pregnancy was ectopic. It failed. And I was pretty broken up about it. Very broken up about it. And I looked at it and it was like, well, my other tube could fail just as easily as my first one did. We need to try again. And so we did, and that's how our daughter was born, our first child. And I want them to know when they're older that sometimes pregnancies fail, and that's not, it can be very discouraging, but that's not a reason to give up trying for a baby. I knew a girl, and I've never forgotten her. She actually gave me some baby clothes when I was pregnant with either my second or my first child. She got pregnant. She was one of those feminist types, so she never wanted to have a kid, but she got pregnant with her husband, and she started getting excited, and she started buying baby clothes, and she started, you know, kind of thinking, well, I'm gonna have a baby. And then she miscarried, and she was so hurt about it that she never got pregnant again. Like, she avoided getting pregnant like the plague, and ultimately ended up giving me all the baby clothes that she had bought for her baby. And she's one of those women, like, about my age, getting kind of into her mid-30s. She has a lot of dogs. And I always thought it was just heartbreakingly sad that she let that one defeat just completely stop her from ever trying again, because I don't know, I think she would be a good mom, and she was too hurt to ever try again. And I don't ever want one of my kids to have to go through that. Like, I think it's important for women to talk about failed pregnancies and pregnancies that don't go the way they're supposed to go, because sometimes people get into a situation where they get pregnant, they get excited, and then they just get completely crushed when it fails. And they fail. Sometimes they fail. 10% of the time, if you're healthy and under the age of 35, 10% of the time it's still gonna fail. And it's hard, but it's worth it to keep trying. And if you know beforehand that it might not always work out, you understand that it's worth it to keep trying. You have a little bit of warning. You're cushioned a little bit from the cruel shock of finding out that your baby isn't going to live. And so I'm definitely going to be telling my kids about what happened to their siblings, 2 of them now, I'm gonna try and warn them, you know, sometimes it happens and it's still worth it to try for another baby. You know, if you're losing every single baby, you know, definitely go to a fertility clinic, find out what's going on wrong. But, you know, every once in a while you just don't get to keep one of them. And that's not, as painful as it might be, that's not a reason to quit. You have to keep trying. And I'm happy my parents warned me ahead of time. I'm happy that I'm not happy that my aunt had her experiences, but I'm happy that I was included in my aunt's experiences. I'm happy that she told us about it. I'm happy that my family actually talked pretty openly about what happened when her 2 sons died, because it gave me the time and the ability to think about how I felt about all that, how I felt about what she had been through, how I felt about fatality in early life, like very early life, under a year. It gave me that little extra bit of warning so that when it happened to me, I wasn't just completely shocked and unprepared. I was pretty shocked and I was pretty hurt, but I had a little bit of forethought on the matter, and it was nice that I was able to go back to those old thoughts and reflections and kind of think, well, now that I'm here, what do I do? And I think it would be important, at least for me, to prepare my kids in case they ever encounter something like this, with the knowledge that it does occasionally occur. And as horrible as it might sound, it's not the end of the world. I read this article by this woman who had had a miscarriage, and she was really annoyed by all the people who were like, well, you can always try for another baby. And she's like, well, I wanted that baby. That's the one I wanted. And it's like, well, having lost 2 babies, that might have been the baby you wanted, but you didn't get to have that baby. Don't let it stop you from having another baby. Anyway, that's all. I'll talk to you guys later.